to Conversations with the Smith Family. I'm Doug Taylor, the CEO of the Smith Family, and through these conversations, we look at work across Australia that's focused on giving all young people the opportunity to change their future through the power of education. Now, today, I'm joined by Dr. Kirsten Hancock from our research and advocacy team here at the Smith Family. Kirsten spent a decade looking at attendance issues here in Australia and also overseas. School attendance has certainly been a big topic of conversation, and it's been in the news and hitting the headlines, principally because we've seen attendance levels continue to decline. It's a really complex issue, and one that requires a modern understanding of the complex challenges that children face, and really requires a modern understanding of how we might respond to this really important issue. So today we thought we'd look at what's been covered in the news and what the research shows, and importantly, what new approaches we need to help students attend school. So welcome, Kirsten. I'm going to start off with a bit of a personal question for you, which is that I'd like you to share with us your most memorable education moment.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I remember visiting university when I was a kid and just being in awe of the library and the buildings and the grounds and thinking, I want to go here when I grow up, with no understanding of what a university actually was or what people did there. My parents were thrilled with that declaration and spent the next 10 years or so helping me figure out how to get there. And I just reflect on that moment as, it wouldn't have seemed like a big deal at the time, but just understanding that those early exposures, you never know which ones, but they can end up being really important.
That's so true, isn't it? And obviously, in our work at the Smith Family, we try to spend a lot of time helping young people have experiences beyond the school gates, in workplaces, in universities, in other tertiary institutions, because they do have those really powerful moments in creating expectations and kind of raising opportunities for the future. So thanks for that Kirsten. I remember those sorts of experiences myself. So school attendance is a big focus for us at the Smith Family. It's something we measure for all the students on our Learning for Life program as one indicator of how they're faring in their education. As a researcher in this space, why is this such an important measure, and what are the concerns, right now, particularly for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds?
At the core, every day of attendance is like a little dose of opportunity. So, our education system is designed to provide an opportunity for all children and young people to gain the knowledge and the skills and the capabilities to grow up and live the kind of life that they value. And attendance is a pretty simple measure that can give us an idea of the degree to which they're accessing that opportunity. And the research is really clear that students with lower attendance can struggle with their learning and their engagement at school, and it can also affect their relationships with peers and teachers, which are really important. And so if a student isn't attending well, then it's a good signal that their learning might be compromised, and then that down the track could affect the kinds of choices that they have available to them about the decisions they want to make with their life. Attendance is a worry now because the average attendance rates are well down on where they were before COVID. They were in decline before that. So naturally, there's a worry about what this means for long-term student outcomes. And the research is also really clear that students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have lower attendance on average. It's been that way for a very long time. And these same students can also experience a range of challenges that affect their attendance. They also affect their learning, and it can put them behind their more advantaged peers. And so for these students, attendance and that exposure to what schools offer becomes even more important.
So true, Kirsten, and we know through our research and through your research, the work that you do, how, as you've said, how closely connected attendance is to achievement. Young people feeling confident in their learning and as though they're making progress and learning things, but also school completion, and that being so critically important today and into the future with a very different labour market that we have here in Australia. School attendance has also attracted a lot of media attention this year, and it's interesting to look at what's been covered given the enormous complexity of the issue. From your perspective, Kirsten, what are some of the key trends that you've noticed in terms of what's getting talked about in the kind of public conversation about attendance?
The good thing is that it's being picked up and talked about, which is it's good. And it does get a lot of attention because the trends that we've seen recently are not unique to Australia. In fact, we've seen them all over the world, and it seems to be emerging as one of those hot button topics about what the response should be. Everyone has an opinion. Unfortunately, a lot of the responses we're seeing are based on some assumptions and outdated ideas. So, if we go to England, for example, I was reading just last week that nearly 400,000 parents last year were fined for failing to ensure their child attends school. That's the highest ever recorded, and about 3/4 of those fines were for unauthorised holidays. So the problem with this approach is that these fines do nothing to address the actual cause of missing school, which are highly varied, typically complex, and look different from family to family. When it comes to the holidays, which was a big chunk of those fines, you'll probably find that most parents are going to make their own decision about the cost of travelling during school holidays, and so they'll factor in the cost of that fine into the savings they might make. Um, and research would also show that in terms of achievement outcomes, in-term holidays aren't the biggest concern. There's other students that we'd probably be better looking at. So the other families receiving these fines are those that have a lot of what they call unauthorised absences. And what this means is that a student misses school without providing an explanation or getting in touch with the school, or the family provides an explanation that the school doesn't accept. So, for most students who regularly miss school, the fact that they're not there is an indication, really, that some other thing is going on and that they might need some support with. So, maybe there's a child in the family that has chronic illness that requires a lot of hospital visits, and maybe contacting the school isn't the first priority for that day. Or maybe the family is struggling with income, and they're a low income family, and we know that some children will feel embarrassed about going to school without the right uniform or without their lunch, and that can cause them tummy aches, and they say they're sick and they want to stay home. Now, just imagine laying a fine on top of that. It doesn't do anything to improve the situation, and all it does is strain the relationship between the school and the family, which is the opposite of what we want to happen. And what actually works is finding a way to help.
Yeah, great insights, Kirsten, and it's interesting in a lot of the contemporary age, and even historically, of course, how quickly we move to kind of punitive measures, which have never shown great ways of driving change in outcomes, but can often be a first response. And so important to kind of understand those drivers and then think proportionally about how we respond to them and where the biggest drivers are and where we're going to get the biggest outcomes. So that makes an enormous amount of sense. So thinking a bit more about other media that we've seen in recent times. I'm thinking particularly about the Four Corners piece on kids who can't go to school. It struck a chord with a lot of people, and it certainly identified issues that we see playing out in families that we work with and that we support. What did that piece highlight to you, and what do you think was covered well?
The Four Corners story was so interesting. It addressed school can't, which is the preferred term for school refusal. And the story painted a really vivid picture of what that looks like on a daily basis for students and families. And what this means, school can't, is when a student has such an anxious response to the thought of going to school that they physically cannot bring themselves to go. They often can't describe why they feel that way. They just feel with their entire being that they cannot be in that school environment. It is deeply distressing for parents who go through this. They understand exactly what is at stake. They want their child to be attending school, but at the same time, physically dragging their child into a situation they can't be in just makes everything worse. And so you have parents dealing with shame and stigma who need to quit jobs so that they can homeschool, but they often can't afford to do that. So it's a really, really complex situation for an increasing number of students and their families. besides painting that picture really well, I think what the story did an excellent job of doing was to show how well these students were doing when they found a place that suited them better. So it's not that they just didn't want to go to school at all, they just couldn't deal with where they were. And unfortunately, there's more students needing those alternative options than there are spots available. But really, I think we need to focus on ways of making mainstream school a more suitable place and to suit a wider range of student needs.
Yeah, you're right. It was quite powerful to see the before and after, really, when young people in an environment where they feel comfortable and able to participate. It was quite remarkable. And I think what stood out to me was just the unbelievable resilience of those parents and carers, just being there for their child, supporting them, and constantly trying to find better options for their children. Unbelievable resilience, really. So it's quite impressive and inspirational. So, thinking forward to options for the future, what would you like to see more attention on in terms of helping people really understand this issue today in the contemporary context, particularly for young people who experience disadvantage?
I think this is why the media coverage has been so important. So, in my experience, when I talk about attendance, people will often jump in with assumptions about why students don't attend based on their own experience, whether they've attended school recently or a long time ago. They'll say things like, well, these students are lazy, or their parents don't care, or students are just bored, or they'd rather be playing video games. We hear this a lot. And because these reasons are misunderstood, their go-to response is just trying to find ways of forcing compliance through fines or penalties, which we talked about just before. I think the problem with those responses is there is a tiny kernel of truth in those. Sometimes there are students who are bored, or sometimes they do want to play video games, and that can become a challenge. But the problem is trying to pick that up and apply it to everybody. There's recent data from the OECD that shows that for students missing a significant amount of school, the number one reason for students doing that is illness. And there's not much you can do there, right? Except make sure those students are getting the right supports to catch up where possible, because those absences still matter, even if they can't be avoided. The next most common reasons were I didn't feel safe at school, I was bored, so there's the boredom piece, I had to take care of a family member, or I had transportation problems, along with a range of other reasons. So if a student isn't feeling safe at school or they're bored, that's an opportunity for a school to figure out how they might help in that situation. And if that's happening for a lot of students in their school, then maybe there's something bigger they can do to help a lot of students at the same time. So it doesn't have to be necessarily individual responses to individual issues that students are facing. The trick there is knowing that, of course, and not making assumptions that is the case. You have to talk to your students and understand what's going on. The other issues relating to caring for family members or transportation problems, that's not something a school can address directly, but they can help by connecting a family to support services or non-profit organisations that can help out in some way. And that's just about being organised and knowing where to make those referrals when they do come up. So there are things that we can do, but it really depends on knowing what's going on for students in a particular school.
So true. Great to have those insights from the OECD in terms of the drivers, but obviously you're right. We've got to dig underneath that and have the conversations with those students and families to understand really what's going on, and that's necessary. But it is difficult in the contemporary school life with many pressures on schools, workforce challenges and the like, but having the time and resources to do that well is critical for addressing attendance. So taking that a step further and thinking about the changes that you think we need to make given those drivers around attendance, what do you think at the kind of community level and at the policy level we need to see in place in the future?
As we've just talked about, I think we need to change the way we talk about the issue. So the headlines that talk about school refusal or students skipping school, these disobedient students not doing what we want them to, they really play into those old stereotypes about the typical non-attending student, and it's just not very helpful. And I think the driver of that comes from our legal frameworks. So I'd like to see attendance reframed at that level, away from something that's a legal obligation to one that recognises attendance is a symptom of something else. And then the something else we need to focus on is that, and not attendance itself as the issue. And then the policies and the action on the ground can pick up from that and reflect those sorts of changes. At the community level, I think we need much better collaboration between schools and non-profits, business and government, to ensure that families do have the right mix of services that are close to home and meet their needs. And mental health support's probably a really good example of that. It's an issue that is affecting more young people at earlier ages. It does affect their attendance and how well they can engage at school, but the resources to help there are spread very thin. So well-resourced mental health services situated within schools would make a world of difference to a lot of students.
Yeah, great insights, Kirsten. And you're so right. I mean, the framing matters. So having a legal frame sets a path of interventions that probably aren't helpful, as opposed to health-based approaches that you've identified. And it's been great to have a focus in the National School Reform Agreement on wellbeing, and I know that's going to be a policy priority now and into the future. So helpful to think about how interventions can be developed to support that, but equally how we can get the health, disability systems better working with education systems as you identify. So thank you. So look, just in closing, Kirsten, you've had the benefit of taking a global view on this, having travelled and looking at international context as well. What really kind of gives you hope about how we can address this issue, and where have you seen positive developments?
I think we are seeing a lot of change right now, which is really good to see, but of course there's a long way to go. With the issue popping up in the news more often, that might talk about the fines at schools, for example, but it will also have people talking about how that's not helpful. So that's sort of a way to have that conversation, in the public eye, which is really good. And the more we talk about it, the more people will understand the complexities that are involved. I think more and more schools and school leaders are understanding that students will respond better to an offer of help than something that's more on the punitive side, so that students can sort of feel, hey, there's someone on my side, and this is a good place for me to be. Schools are getting much better access to better data that helps them identify those problem areas much earlier before they become more entrenched and more difficult to manage, and identify those students who might be struggling in lots of different areas. And we're also getting more high quality research all the time that provides a better roadmap of what the best responses are, and that's really important. So these are all excellent developments. We just need the policies and the resources to implement the things that are more likely to work.
Well, that's fantastic. And what's great to hear about that momentum, and you've made a wonderful contribution to that as well with your research and advocacy, Kirsten. So thanks for your contribution to this really important public conversation, and thanks to each of you who've joined us for this conversation today. It's timely and it's relevant, and it's incredibly important that we address this issue for young people so they can make the most of their education. That's one of the things that we're focused on at the Smith family. If you'd like to hear or learn more about our work or join in other conversations that we're having, jump on to thesmithfamily.com.au and you can read more there. Thanks so much.